can make some videos. Before I start this one, I'll have a more sort of like basic commentary video after this one. But before I do this video, we did a symposium last night with Siofra O'Donovan, a very nice lady who's fascinating insights into the Joseph Campbell monomyth, hero's journeys kind of thing. And she's also had a very interesting life, so I'll put the link to that if you haven't seen it in the top of the comments of this video. Now, yesterday I watched a very good interview with Neil Oliver on GB News Network, I think it's called, where he's a regular on there now. He's fallen from grace from the BBC. And he was talking, the interview was about his life story, basically, and how he got into different things. Now, I first came across him about 20 years ago on a wonderful, well, visually wonderful and relaxing BBC Sunday night show called Coast, where they travelled around the coasts of Britain and Ireland, and they'd visit ancient sites or all kind of new things or landscape, nature, all kinds of interesting stuff. And it was that very kind of like agreeable Sunday night shows that the BBC are very good at, where they take on travelogues and give you a little bit of history and things like that. And you sit there having your cup of tea after your dinner and having a chocolate biscuit watching it. Very low impact, very nice TV. So that's how I remembered it. I never remember. I didn't see them all. I didn't particularly have a big problem with them. So he was talking about the show Coast and working with the BBC and all this kind of thing and how he got involved in that. And when the interview was over, I just Googled to see if I could find Coast. And I put Neil Oliver. And the first one that came up was one in Ireland. Well, a couple came up, but I went to the Ireland one. And it was from Dublin to Cork. And there was, hosted very eloquently and very professionally by a very likeable younger Neil Oliver. And started off in Cork City, and a bit of a silly thing where he's with the Irish Naval Service and pretending to capture a criminal and a few other bits and bobs. An interesting piece on the Titanic. But they had multiple hosts to the show, and one of them was a woman called Alice something. She's now like a big shot on the BBC. She's like the resident historian. She seems like a nice enough lady and everything, which it's pure establishment, So after that segment, it goes to show the round tower at Ardmore. Now, Ardmore Round Tower is the biggest one in Ireland. It's absolutely enormous. And it's sort of towers. Now, even if you take the conventional dating that was built in the Middle Ages, it would have been like a skyscraper by European standards. So anyway, she's got some lovely exterior shots of the round tower. And then she goes down and she shows a standing stone that has Ogham, ancient Irish Ogham script on it. And she calls it Ogham. Now, I understand that's because it's not for an Irish audience per se. And it is phonetically spelt Ogham, even though it's pronounced Ogham. And she had an Irish antiquities person come along with her, just another nice young lady, and asked her, could she translate the Ogham? And she showed her what the different letters were. And Ogham, the Irish woman said Ogham, but you can see that she didn't want to say it. She said Ogham, she didn't want to say it. The BBC producer obviously told them to pronounce it phonetically. So then she showed how to spell her name Alice in the sand. And she asked her, what's the history of this writing? And she goes, blah, 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 the usual standard thing. It's early Christian writing. When the Christians came to Ireland, the Irish didn't know how to write. They had no skills. They were just basically uga muga. She didn't say that, but that's the usual thing that's implied. And they invented, just a stupid rationale behind that thing. They invented this Ogham thing because they were now Christians and wanted to learn. When meanwhile, things like languages like Latin and Brittonic was even available to them. So, and I think even French by that period, that time. But no, they went for, and this never made any sense to me. And then she says, well, when does this particular stone date from? And she goes, the 4th century AD. Now that's 300 AD, the year 300-ish. That's long before St. Patrick came to Ireland. So what are you talking about? It's a Christian thing. or it's a Christian thing. And then I said, this is, you don't, this, it's because it's okay, it's in Latin, translates from Latin, like a lot of them do, into, or sometimes into Irish, but generally it's Latin. It's assuming that the Christians brought them and had nothing, the Irish had no capability to go to mainland Europe and encounter the Romans, or the Romans in Britain, and pick up learn their language or pick it up. No, we're all backwards savages waiting for St. Patrick to arrive. That's the cover story. So then she goes to the round tower at Ardmore. My blood was boiling by this point, and she goes, there's been many outlandish theories, not a BBC thing, the hands going like this. Actually, she's done a couple of shows on Ireland, and she's does that BBC thing. I made fun of her thinking a documentary with, a report I did with Neil MacDonald, where it's gone, the BBC hands, BBC. She does this. And she did one in Ireland, on the history of Ireland. It wasn't bad, but it was completely mainstream. And she said there's been some outlandish theories about these round towers, that they were built by I don't know what she said, or that they were used to collect paramagnetic energy from the stars to help crops grow better. No, that's not what what's his name? Oh, Philip Callahan said. He said that they collected diamagnetic energy from the sun, not from the stars, and it helps crop yields. And then she goes, but the real story is much more prosaic than that. Down there in the valley below is St. Mary's Church. This was simply a bell tower to call the people to prayer. Now, for fuck's sake, first of all, the tower wasn't anywhere near the churchyard, right? So why would and then she compared it to the towers they have in Italy, which look nothing like the Irish round towers. That's just one Irish academic said that. And, of course, he was in the establishment, so it flew. Now, so I watched that, and it was like, you don't know what you're talking about, and you're just regurgitating what the Irish establishment regarding antiquities told you to say. And it's bollocks, and it's easily disproven bollocks. The woman even said herself that the Ogham script on the standing stone was from the 3rd century. That's before Christianity, so how is it a Christian stone? Okay, so, and there's very little Christian inscriptions on those stones. A lot of them are to do with family lineages, and some of them are even to do with things like son of the Morrigan and things like that. And the one that's in Owen Nagat Cave up in Roscommon actually says Freaker, son of Maeve. It actually tells you that Queen Maeve exists in her, and it's in her kingdom. And that thing is now turned on its side and used a lintel inside the cave to hold the ceiling up. But it used to be outside. They haven't a clue. She did admit that the round towers were completely mysterious. Now, then she tells you what they were for, they're bell towers. Now, the only reason they're called bell towers is because, well, you couldn't ring a bell in them anyway, because you wouldn't hear them, is because in the Middle Ages they put conical caps on them to make them look like church towers. They weren't. They had a flat top, or some of them had a rounded top, like almost phallic. In fact, the one down in Scattery, Ireland with the phallic top, I think that was the original one. They looked like a giant penis. And when you think about that, they actually fertilized the land through diamagnetic energy. Maybe they are a phallus. You just don't know. But they are they're well older than when they said they were built like the 8th, 9th century, around the times of the Vikings and so on like that. They're much older than that. And, and they just are. And they've all been built to a very similar specification, not the height, which shows you there's an element of fine tuning. Like, when you pull up your old FM radios or AM radios, when you pulled up the aerial, the antenna and pushed it back down, like on your car, that was almost like a fine tuning, and that's why they're all different heights. But any Irish farmer who brings cattle or sheep near them will tell you the cattle and the sheep want to graze around the round tower. So don't tell me there's nothing to that. Now, my blood was boiling, I was like, I'm not too bad now, but I was like, there's so much liars, so much, but it's smug establishment orthodoxy at the end of the day that holds the whole thing together. It's like, well, I know what I'm talking about because I agree with the experts. Well, let's look at the experts of Irish antiquities. basically two gatekeeping operations: the Jesuits in Maynooth in County Kildare, and the Royal Irish Academy in Dublin, Belfast, and London. And they basically decide what the story of ancient Irish history is, particularly in regard to the crossover period between Christianity and from paganism to Christianity. Basically, the bottom rule is, and has been for the last 250 years, if you find something that's very impressive, it's Christian. If you find something that's very primitive, it's pagan. That's the rule. The only deviation from that rule is that if it's built in a circle, it's pagan. If it's built in a square, it's Christian. Apart from that, that's it. They know nothing else. So like, there's absolutely nothing to suggest that the Arda chalice is a chalice used in Christian services, because it's huge. A chalice used in Christian services are small cups, not these big cauldrons. Who had cauldrons? The Druids had cauldrons. The pagans had cauldrons. The Ardagh chalice is so beautiful and so magnificent that they could not give any Irish people that were not Christian credit for it. They couldn't give them credit for it. So they said it's a Christian chalice. Now, this is the kind of things you have to deal with. Why? Why is it a Christian chalice? Well, because it's beautiful. And pagan Irish couldn't have built it. And that's literally what they're like. Now, the first one I want to talk about, this is going to be a bit of a long video. I'm sorry if you're not interested in ancient history stuff, but it's a pain in the arse for me when I was watching this. Newgrange is an abomination. Remember that. I want my name to go down in history of calling Newgrange an abomination. And all these people who ponce around Newgrange going, I missed Newgrange this, Newgrange that, Newgrange that. And you know the way Newgrange looks? You'll see the thumbnail on the picture of this video. That big white quartz wall around there. That is completely a piece of 1960s brutalistic theoretical architecture. That is completely a flight of fancy, pseudo-scientific bullshit by some archaeologist to build and to make Newgrange look like a 1960s shopping centre. That wall around the outside, that white wall, bollocks. Completely and utter bollocks. But it's establishment bollocks, so therefore it's good. And as you'll hit this all the time, right? Now, there has been some controversy regarding Newgrange and the light box which the light comes in on the winter solstice. And we know, I read up on that, and for a while there I was like, God, this guy might have a point, that the same archaeological vandals who made that 1960 shop at the shopping mall facade for Newgrange out of white stones probably made the lintel go there so it would lighten the winter sun. But you know, when you look deeper into it, well, in my own book, and I talk about the Welsh antiquarian Lund, who came to Ireland in 1699, sorry, and spoke to local farmers, and local farmers told him that there was a barbarous heathen operation that took place in this place, or he said barbarous, dedicated to the ancient god Angus Og, that happened with something to do with the sun. So thousands of years after Newgrange had fallen into kind of ruin, basically, that we're aware of, the local people knew it was a solar temple. So that we know for a fact that light box on the roof, it was there. That is real. That was meant to happen. The light coming in on that. So that wasn't part of the 1960s archaeological establishment vandalism. So we'll give them that one, okay? Now, there's other things about Newgrange, right? We're never allowed to talk about the vast hordes of Roman coins that have been found around it. Just not allowed to talk about it. Let's talk about the Roman coins that have been all found around Newgrange. No. It's just wow, we found lots of, it's a little interesting thing. But it's not even, that tells me that people were probably coming from all over Europe to attend pagan festivals, processional rites, and so on, right into the Roman era. And the coins are probably either dropped or lost or offerings or whatever. But they were going there, and that was still well deep into the Roman era before Christianity. Newgrange was being used as some kind of a temple, and people are some kind of a religious or festival place, and people from the Roman world were coming. That's another thing. I was growing up in school told the Romans knew nothing about Ireland. They called it the land of winter, Hibernia, and that they knew nothing about the place. And that's what I was told. Turns out now, I mean, here we go. Both Tacitus and Agricola wrote extensively on Ireland, where said that that Ireland was well known to the Romans. And we know that from Ptolemy's map, which clearly shows sub-Dublin and Tara and even Sligo and the tribes living here, like the Brigantes, which are a kind of a Celtic Romanized tribe. And that was clearly they knew about Ireland quite well. And it even has Navan Fort marked on it, but they give them the Roman and Greek names. But like Dublin is Ablanapolis, a Greek name, the Greek name for it. And suddenly I find out, and then that wasn't surprising enough. I said, well, the Romans are very interested in Ireland. What are you talking about? They built the port of Chester near Liverpool in order so they could trade back and forth with Ireland. What are you talking about? They've no interest in it. And then it turns out that the south coast of Ireland was one of the richest places in the world at the time because of huge copper deposits. And the Romans were in there getting that, not fighting, they were like trading. And then it turns out again that there's a place in North County Dublin called Drummanagh, which is basically a Roman settlement. It's just been bought by Fingal County Council. You cannot stick your finger in the soil there without pulling up a Roman coin or a piece of Roman pottery or something. And yet they were still telling kids in Irish schools the Romans never came here. Until St. Patrick came, of course. So everything is to reinforce that Ireland had no history until St. Patrick, it didn't exist, arrived in the 400s. Didn't exist. Now, another classic example of that is there was an Irish academic, I think his name was Rynn. He's dead now, and he was a Catholic fanatic. And I have even heard somebody back in the 90s at one of his lectures, I think it was at some Irish university, was running a tape recorder and recording it just for his own notes. And you can actually hear students in the background going, "Is this guy for real?" And laughing at him. Talking about this guy Rynn. This guy Rynn wrote a book on, which you can see the PDF version online, on Irish swastikas. And Ireland is covered in ancient swastikas, right? And they're all from that same period, the late Iron Age, the height of the Roman Empire, into the Christian thing. So we'd say like the 1st to the 3rd century, or the late Iron Age, maybe before BC, just at that, like towards the end of that period, right? I actually believe the round towers were constructed about 50 to 0 BC. So they're before the Christians came, but they were built by Irish. But they may have been older ones already that were replaced by them. And there's another, because I'll tell you, they found the foundations of them now in few places that they've never been built upon, as if they were the original ones. And then these ones these ones need more investigation, because I've been told they have no cement in them. So therefore, we don't see, the timelines are unbelievable. So I mean, and then again, the west, this damp island on the west end of Europe, having the most tall buildings. Come on, just like Orkney on the end of Scotland, having all the most megaliths and things like Skara Brae, with flushing sanitary systems 5,500, maybe 6,000 years ago. There's obviously some kind of influence coming from the Atlantic. That was no long. That's Atlantis, isn't it? Whatever you want to, whatever Atlantis was called itself, but or whatever that culture, that empire was. But this is the mentality, and it's all very like state of script, boys, and you'll be in the club. Deviates from script, and you'll be out. And I'll give you an example of that. And there's so much jealousy involved as well. And there's so much sort of like mediocrity. The Irish antiquities will allow a non-academic person in to join their little group as long as you're mediocre and you do as they say and be a good little boy and behave yourself and play the orthodoxy thing, okay? And I'll give you an example of something that happened, right? This book is called The Stars in a Stone. It was written by an Irish-American called Martin Brennan. It is a classic. It's a classic study of Irish rock art in connection at different megalithic sites from the 1970s in relationship to solar, lunar, and astrological alignments. Now, Martin Brennan was an Irish-American along with Jack Roberts, who you've seen of the interview. You've seen interviews I've done with him. Jack Roberts, the two of them had a group called and there's another chap, Toby. He lives in Czechoslovakia now. Toby, Toby, I forgot your second name. But the three of them had a thing called the Starlights Project. But it was mainly Martin Brennan and Jack and the guy Toby helping him. Now, the Starlights Project, I think Starlights or Starfield Project, they would sleep in. This is the original copy. It's very hard to get, but it's available in a new cover. But this is the original, the real old one. There was they would sleep in megalithic chambers, right? And then they would wait for the sun to come up, and then they would see lunar things in like a cairn T, I think it was, a cairn L at Loch Crew. They saw that the sun on a certain date lit up the artwork at the back of the chamber, and they were trailblazers in all this. Trailblazers, right? And they discovered a whole bunch of alignments. I think it was at Loch Crew, and the Irish media ran with the story. This was the late 70s, I think, and the cover of the Irish Independent, I think it was, they were on the cover, and there was a picture of Jack and Martin Brennan, and it said something like, modern day adventurers discover the magic of the megaliths, or something like that. Well, what happens after that? The mainstream mundane gatekeepers in archaeology dive on them. Martin Brennan practically got deported back to the USA, and Jack was okay. Jack's English, but it was just like what are these amateurs doing? These amateurs doing, telling us what we don't know. It was just jealousy. It was just jealousy because these guys had captured the public imagination with solar and cosmic alignments and the ancient sites, and they were total mavericks thinking out of the box. And Martin Brennan was an expert on Mayan from his times living in North America, on the Mayan rock art. So he was able to draw, and this is the main thing here. The reason why there's so much mediocrity in the field of Irish antiquities is because it's so parochial. It's amazing. They cannot view Irish megaliths and ancient sites in the context of anything beyond the little patch that they all run. It's really bizarre. Now, what I've learned about the megaliths is that you have to compare them to ones in other countries. It's just like folklore. It's just like mythology. That the best way to understand the mythology of your own country and to really understand its true archetypal worth is to study the mythologies of other countries, other cultures, and then from that, this comparative insight into mythology, you get to understand the mythology of your own culture a lot better. Now, there's a book by a guy called, what was his name? Stephen Blamires. Blamires of Blam, I can't remember his name. And it's called The Irish Celtic Magical Tradition. Very interesting book. This is from the 70s or 80s. What he did was he took the Táin Bóid Clúige, the Táin, the Irish famous epic involving Queen Main, King Éil, and Cuchulainn and all that, the cattle raided Cooley, and kind of imagined it as the Irish version of the Bhagavad Gita, using that same kind of Indo-European template. Wow, that's the way to do it. Now, how this all came to me like this was about 7 or 8 years ago. I was at Creevy Keel Court Cairn, a megalith in County Sligo, and it's a one that was famous for like fairies and all kinds of apparitions until a team from Harvard excavated it in the 1940s, and the locals then said all the fairies left. But it has a kind of like a mini version of that Stonehenge thing in the middle, like the stone on top and the two orthostats. And I was standing on top of that with the tour group down below, like I was like using it as a kind of stage. And the ocean is right beside you, just down the hill there at Mullaghmore, so you can see the ocean. And I was this close just for a laugh to invoking the great god Cthulhu via the rite in Colin Wilson's Necronomicon, the Book of Dead Names, which is a spoof, I know, but and I was doing it as a joke, kind of like, but a feeling came over me that was like me parodying a Lovecraftian ritual from a magical ritual regarding a sea monster feels a hell of a lot more authentic standing on this 5,500-year-old megalith in Ireland than anything Irish antiquities really tells me. It was almost like that was the truth. My imagination poured. Yeah, I mean, you look down below, you can say, some people say to me, what is this? And I'll say, okay, it's called a court cairn. It's called a court cairn because there's a court area in front, and they're all across this part of Ireland, but on a certain latitude, which is kind of interesting in itself. They're basically across from Sligo to Dundalk, basically that across the country that way, mainly in Ulster. And yeah, down there is the remains of a forge that was built by the Vikings or by the Irish in the Middle Ages. And you can tell them that stuff. And then they say, well, what was this place for? And I would say, nobody knows. Yes, you can talk about they have similarities. They have certain alignments of east, west, so on. They have antechambers that are kind of similar. But no archaeologist can really tell you anything about it. And this is why there's so much gatekeeping in ancient archaeology and ancient sites. Is because the archaeologists don't know dick. They don't know dick, really. It's just stones, for the most part. Now, heavily investigated and places such as Newgrange, such as Stonehenge, yes, we know that the Amesbury archer was found buried there. They knew by looking at his dental records he came from the Switzerland area, and he came on a pilgrimage as Stonehenge was the main stone monument was being completed. But what does that tell us really? And what it tells us that he was there when we think the final version of Stonehenge existed. And how do they know this? Well, they go by the carbon dating thing. Now, I told you the carbon dating thing is generally very misleading because bunny rabbits and everything else move the soil under the stones. So it's a really iffy thing to go by. And there are places where it can be useful. For instance, in the ceiling at Newgrange, when they opened that up in the 1960s, they found trapped sods of turf, soil, dirt as you Americans call it, in between the stones in the ceiling. And that they were able to carbon date, and they carbon dated that to about 25 to 300 BC, 3000 BC. So, and that was pretty accurate in terms of the sort of integrity of the sample they used. But however, that doesn't mean that's when the roof was put on Newgrange. Newgrange could have existed much, much longer than that. And that roof was added later or repaired later. See, this is the whole thing. They never seem to understand that that the ancients did things like repair things and fix them and modernize them and change them. They can't get their heads around that. The gatekeeping is not unique to Britain and Ireland by any means. Our Tina Kemp over there in Italy, she's from Belgium, has told us, made videos on how the Etruscan, if they are Etruscan megaliths, they could be older, in Italy are ignored, or everything that's not Roman is ignored. So there's vast gatekeeping there on that stuff. Now, there's also this other belief that because the ancient Greeks and Romans built really constructed things like Doric columns and archways and all this, that the megaliths of northwestern Europe and the British Isles and Scandinavia are somehow crude and backward. No, I don't think they are at all. I think that they're sympathetically designed because the people like the shape of the stones. And what proves that to me is you just look at the artwork on the stones in somewhere like Nout or in Newgrange, and these people were tremendous artists. I mean, this is the interior orthostats. Look at this. So you're telling me that they could carve and do all this amazing artwork on these stones, but they didn't know how to square them off and make them look like Roman or Greek megaliths? No, they could. Obviously, if they could do this, they could have done them as proper constructions, but they didn't. Because why? Because they liked the stones being this shape. They liked the organic shapes. They could have very easily built Greek and Roman type high engineered substructures in wood, and the stone was for a different thing altogether. This is another thing. We assume that they didn't have any wooden buildings. Well, we know from the GPS or the GPS, not GPS, the geophys survey of Tara, that there's some huge buildings there that were there at one time, built of wood. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the stave churches of Norway, you know, the famous stave churches that look like something from Lord of the Rings, well, in Norway they're open about. They say that was a type of architecture that came to Norway from Ireland and Scotland. That was probably what Tara looked like. It probably looked like Rivendell in Lord of the Rings, made of wood. But they also had the stone, and the stone formed a different function, a different aesthetic. They were happy with the stone the way it looked. And, I'll give you an example. In this day and age, we can build the most beautiful designed modern types houses with triple glazing and stuff like that. But yeah, they still build log cabins. People still live in log cabins. Now, do they live in log cabins because they're backward or they're uneducated? Or do they still build log cabins in places like America and Switzerland and Canada and even Russia because they're backward? No, but because the materials are handy and they like the look of the log cabin. Now, at the time the megaliths were built, Ireland was covered in enormous dense old wood forests. They had phenomenal building material. It seems obvious to me that they would have built beautiful wooden buildings. And the stones were just something else. They weren't the centre of the thing. They were part of it. But there was all around those would have been beautiful wooden buildings with blinged up. We know that they had to have been because you go by the artwork and everything. If they could do that in stone, what could they carve? What the hell could they carve in wood? And so they would have had, but they can't. But no, they're all in animal skills going, ooga booga, ooga booga, until the Christians came along. That's literally how Irish antiquities is. Why? Because it can't think outside of its own parochial, safe environment where there's a cushy kind of like don't rock the boat kind of thing. Now, archaeology is a miserable job. If you want to see people, if you want to see people whose eyes were once full of vitality and joy, and we're now reduced to broken souls, go to any archaeological dig, and you'll see the young people down in the freezing cold weather, scraping the soil for little or no money. They pay them terribly, and they deliberately pay them terribly because they don't want them staying in the profession. They just process them through the universities and colleges, get them their degree, and then they stick them in the dig sites in all kinds of shit rain for shit money. And, you can't raise a family on those salaries. So you see people go into, I want to learn about the ancient past. and then they end up in a ditch with some tenured tenured what's the word, professor standing over them, telling them like what they, well, they're all miserable. Like, see, they're so unhappy. And and I've heard stories from people who used to be archaeologists and left the field. In fact, one of them was a woman who told me about your man, the guy who did the thing on the swastikas, and said the swastikas are Christian because they were built by the early Irish Christians to serve the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's actually written like that in his academic paper. And only one problem, sunshine. Christians didn't worship crucifixes at that period in history. This is because he doesn't look anywhere else. Crucifixes, the cross shape, the swastika, was a pagan symbol. Christians have the symbol of the fish or the symbol of the cockerel or the symbol of the two keys. They did not even have the cross until probably close to the Middle Ages, even not into the Middle Ages. So, because he's in his own little safe zone, he doesn't have to compare it to anything else in Europe and beyond. Swastika is a symbol of the sun. That's universal. And also there's the sigils of Thor and motion is another one I heard. I think it's quite good too as well in the Nordic world. The hammers flying around. But she told me that it's incredible. Was not there were things that she saw, like they would find a highly decorative piece of pottery way deep down in a trench that was clearly from the Neolithic period, 5,500 years ago. And the academic would say, "Let me see that," and he say, "Oh, throw it in with throw it in with the stuff from the Renaissance period." Why? Because it doesn't fit. There's a lot of that kind of thing goes on. A lot of that stuff. Now there was a book, a guy called Rudgley, I think his name was. Yeah, Richard Rudgley. Rudgley. He wrote a book called Lost Civilizations of the Stone Age in the late 90s. This book was a revelation to me when it came out. It was the first time I heard of Göbekli Tepe. And he covers the whole thing that these ancient people were highly technologically advanced, highly cultured, and were much more deserving of respect as architects, builders, social as engineers, as their societies and cultures, as farmers, everything than they're given. And this book was a total revelation. And he went to Brittany, he went to Ireland. He just, it was amazing. The book was fantastic. The book's a fantastic read. The Lost Civilization of the Stone Age by Richard Rudgley. You can get it. I've seen it. I've even seen it in like charity shops. You can pick it up sadly really cheaply. But that was that was another one. Oh God, he was slacked off as well, big time. How dare he? Push the timelines back. You see, it always has to go back to the Christian thing. It always has to go back to the Christian thing. And this is one of the reasons I get angry at that whole stuff. Is because like Irish people are being robbed of our real ancient history because we were told we were animals until St. Patrick, this Romano British aristocrats in the lower, well, he was from money if he existed, if he didn't exist though, came here and taught us how not to be animals. When the Roman pagan writers were talking about Ireland as a kind of almost a comparative society. They weren't talking about Ireland as being backward or anything like that. They were talking about Ireland as like the biggest issue would be the cold. But they spoke about Ireland and kind of like they were describing another Greece or another culture or something. They weren't. It wasn't like they were going, "Oh, the land of cold and damp idiots." It was like it was a cold environment, but it wasn't. They were trading there back and forth constantly. The Irish and the Romans were trading, and yet we were completely denied that from school. So I mean, this is what makes me so annoyed sometimes, is that you don't even have to be an expert to see the lies that they tell us in history, and it's horrible lies. And to see your one from Alice, what was her name, from the BBC, pointing at the round tower. Oh, it's much more prosaic. It's a bell tower. It's not a bell tower. That's the new one. The new one is this bell tower. After decades of lying to us, is where the monks went when the Vikings. It was a bolt hole or a safe zone when the Vikings came, which is the biggest nonsense of all. Philip S. Callahan told us hit the nail close on the head when he said that They are some kind of device for drawing energy into the soil. I'm totally down with that. And they're, but he said they were from the. He agreed with the dating. I don't. I disagree vehemently with the gate. If you could see the one down in Scattery Iron, the one that looks like a penis, that thing is ancient. All the others look modern because they've been fixed over the centuries. They've had the pointing fixed, the cement pointing fixed and stuff like that. The one that looks the purest is the one down in Scattery Iron. That looks that one that boy looks ancient. There's even a place called Holy Island on, on the Shannon in County Clare. They have a round tower there, but they also have a early Christian is ecclesiastical buildings, and one of them is a little small church. And you know what's inside the church? A stone circle. They built the church on top of a small stone circle. So they just basically covered over what people were worshipping. Now, if people had stopped worshipping the stones or seeing them as holy places by the time Christianity arrived, why did the Christians turn a stone circle into a Christian temple? Don't talk about it. Don't go there. And you get some smug amateur gatekeeper who thinks he's hot shit will be telling you that this is what I know is the truth because some academic told me it's the truth. They don't know. Always remember that. I spoke to one chap in England, and it was one of the most beautiful things I think I've ever heard. He runs a metal detectorist podcast. I forget the chap's name, but he said he outlined all the theories of what a dolmen is, you know, and he said, including like the spiritual ones, and he says the thing is none of the theories are wrong, and I thought that was beautiful. None of the theories are wrong. Why? Because the academic theory on what they are is just a guess, and it's often not an educated guess. If you have to date something that's good to the Christian era, and something that's like crude looking to the pagan era, well, that's not an educated guess. That's a prejudice guess. That's a prejudice guess. So that I have to let steam off about that. Forgive me. I know it can be kind of boring with this stuff, but that really bothered me when I watched that BBC thing last night. It was out and out lies, and out and out contradictory lies. How old is the Ogham script? From the 4th century, so it's the 300 AD before Christianity came along, and then you're telling me that this is a Christian monument? Okay, I'll make another video after this. Look after yourselves. Take care. Remember, none of the theories are wrong, as the man said.